Gary, I want to talk about the subjective negative of suffering. If you invent a concept of numbers, positive numbers, of course there's going to be a positive of negative, a concept of negative numbers, right? So you said there is an objective value in suffering, but you want to deny there's an objective value in pleasure, and yet if there's an objective value in suffering, I think you can't really deny that the pleasures are opposite of suffering. You do not have them at the same time, and if you do, you tend to say that it's pleasurable or mixed or not pleasurable based on the balance there. So, when you are having a pleasure of a meal, that is taking you in the opposite direction of suffering. So that's going to be positive. It's like you can say, oh, well, the negative numbers don't really exist. We use them to show debt and things, and you might not pay the debt. Okay. They're still in the opposite direction. So if there's an objective value to the suffering, then there's an objective value to distancing yourself from suffering. And you say that, oh, it's just the alleviation of suffering. But no, we know that if you break your leg and you're suffering from the pain and you take some pain pills and you relieve that suffering, that hasn't actually started a positive, pleasurable experiences. That's not like not having your leg broken and having a pleasurable, safe experience where you don't have to worry about your leg getting broken. So the pleasure has to be a positive value of some sort, the opposite of suffering. So if you want to call suffering the positive value, fine, you define that. That's the material thing. You say that suffering is real. But the problem here really is that you discount suffering as well, right? You don't want to say just every time someone suffers, oh, they didn't cut the crust off of my tuna fish sandwich, oh. You don't want to count that as real suffering. So you have a problem there because it's fairly subjective. You look at the suffering that we would all say that's real suffering, and you count that, and then the rest is a big blurry area. And the issue there that I don't think you'll be able to handle in your system is that yes, we are bioevolutionary creatures. We are designed to find things to suffer over. And if our life is really good, then it might look really pathetic what we decide to suffer over to those whose life isn't so good, It might not look like real suffering. And in a way I would agree with you, but because real suffering would imply some objective value, and really it is subjective. We are working, and this is also part of the issue. I'm not saying that mere survival is good enough, but I'm saying that isn't what we go. When you try to survive, that isn't what we get, When you try to survive, you end up with a system like this that detects pleasures and displeasures and seeks the pleasures. Why? Because that is getting a stronger and stronger life. Everything is relative, including your survival. So you're trying to get the best survival you can. By what means? Objective means? No, by your own means. If you were a tick, then you might think the best survival is some situation where there's lots of hosts to prey upon. So in my system, it basically works out because of the things humans happen to enjoy. We get pleasures in peace and in satisfying our basic needs and satisfying our intellectual needs. Those things happen to work out. But anyway, the main issue is just I don't see how you can deny that a pleasure felt is the opposite of a suffering felt, and therefore, if suffering has an objective value, then pleasure would have to have an objective value. You can't have one and not the other. They're both feelings designed of one big system that manages pleasure and displeasure.